Welcome to the Fire Chat. I'm quite excited to touch on this conversation on innovation and entrepreneurship in Africa. And as we know, with a continent with over 60% of its demographic below 25, innovation, education, and entrepreneurship are constantly cited as ways in which we can capitalize on the continent's demographic dividend. So on our panel today, we have Joselynn, who is an admitted attorney at the High Court of South Africa. She also has a law firm that she established in 2019. We also have Shafin, Anwarsha, who is founder and head of product at Giraffe. We are also, as part of our panel, we also have Ronak, who is the director of Signal Reach. And we also have Matthew Law, who stems from Metaverse and Outliner Ventures. Thank you guys so much for participating. Great. So I think to kick off, what I would like to hear from you guys is really, let's hear about your entrepreneurial journey. Matthew, how would you coin your entrepreneurial journey? What has that been like?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. Great to be here as a previous delegate of BYM. It's great to be on the other side. My entrepreneurial journey started pretty much after a 5-year stint in corporate consulting at IBM South Africa. I joined a small startup called Spazap Systems, which is based in Durban. I gave up a huge, massive paycheck and a 9-to-5 to join this small little startup. And what really enticed me about it was they were really building a mobile native app to help connect large FMCGs, so fast-moving consumer good companies like Tiger Brands, Unilever, and P&G, to small shops based in informal settlements in South Africa called spazas, right? And this is a problem that's kind of existed for decades, and no one's really been able to solve penetrating informal settlements in rural Africa, right? Big corporates haven't been able to do that. And that was really intriguing to me. So the app's kind of goal was to streamline supply chains, to get data on understanding how consumers engage in the acquisitions of goods and services, and then also provide delivery to those really remote and rural stores. And the motivation behind that was really behind helping a really pre-existing idea that so many places in Africa face, which is how do we get to the most remote and most rural places in Africa and come up with a solution to face. And I'll tell you for free, it was not easy. It's great to develop an app and it's very easy to come up with a business plan. But one of the things that we did not account for was we faced massive backlash around providing services to foreign spaza shop owners, right? By South African communities. Xenophobia was something that we did not build into our business plan, as well as pushback on the fact that, you know, we didn't really come across as the best people to connect with these individuals. And so I didn't necessarily see that as a deterrent. It kind of invoked me to become an entrepreneur in Africa, to prove my value in this space and to prove that I can learn empathy, I can learn cultural dynamics, and I can provide really good solutions in the space that really develop and grow entrepreneurship in the space. And it's been a great journey thus far.
Oh, wow. Wow, thank you so much for that, Matt. And I mean, it's quite exciting to see that, you know, when you look at the continent with all its numerous challenges, there are a lot of opportunities that are available on the continent. And I think how you have pursued your journey is reflective of all opportunities and prospects within that landscape, the opportunity to not only add value, from a business point of view, but to actually really change lives in those communities. And it's interesting that you have cited just the political and the social dynamics in those spaces, not being aware of things like xenophobia and so forth. I would like to hear from Ronak, because you work at Signal Risk, and your focus is on the intersection of politics, economics, and business in Africa. What's been your journey like? How have you intersected with those challenges?
Cool, thanks, Bruce, and great to be with you guys. Also, as a former alumni, I did this 10 years ago, so time really does fly. So yeah, I'm a political economist. I worked in investment banking before. These days, I go by the title of corporate sangoma, and I try to make sense of the world and the continent. Most people don't really understand what I do because I do a few different things. I do signal risk, I do some academic stuff, I do some work with think tanks and some writing and speaking. My mom says I'm a modern millennial. I call it a portfolio of careers. And when I try to explain this to my uncles and aunts, they think I'm a freelancer because they don't understand the concept of working in different locations, potentially on a beach, and understanding that you've got time and geographic flexibility in the modern working world. And I think that's a big insight for folks listening to this panel, is that the working world is changing. And what was applicable to the previous generation is not necessarily applicable today, and it won't be a few years down the line. So in terms of kind of the stuff that I do, and why I left investment banking, cushy job, all of that kind of stuff is, I guess, push and pull factors. So I guess the first point is that I had been in banking for 8 years, but it wasn't challenging enough. I felt that life is about chapters. I guess once you get to a certain level in a corporate environment, you have to deal with a level of bureaucracy and politics that is not always fun. And then the world is a big place, so I decided to come to London. Whether that was brave or stupid, I don't really know, but I had to stitch the parachute on my way down. And it's been remarkable from many perspectives, largely because of the growth. I think when you're used to a corporate environment, you're used to doing A and getting B. You're used to kind of just achieving all the time. And I think you learn very quickly on an entrepreneurial journey that you need to fail, and failure is important. I think the other thing that you realize is that nothing's straightforward. It's not linear. You need to play in the gray areas, and things won't always go according to plan, especially if you go to a new country and you do something new. And there are days where you really feel like you want a hug from someone, but I think it's part of the growth and the journey. And then I think the third thing that I really took out of this is the value of your reputation and your relationships, in terms of really allowing yourself to succeed when you go through this journey, because it's not always easy. So I guess that's the journey. What I do is really fun. Try to make sense of the world and the continent. I understand trends and themes, and I try to kind of effectively advise people making investment decisions about the future of the continent. And we can talk a little bit more about that a bit later, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, and it's beautiful to hear how you have a passion for the growth of the continent, and just how you've invested yourself in all those spheres. I'm quite excited to hear from Shafin, because you are the founder of Giraffe, and you have an appetite for creating a platform where young people can tap into the job market, which is a very important part of of a young person's life and growth and progression. Would you please share a bit about your story?
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think I was quite fortunate in sort of my entrepreneurial career, in that, the stars just aligned at the right place at the right time. I was in consulting before I started my first venture, which was Giraffe. And I started to get to a point in my career where I started to question the work I was doing. I was enjoying it, but I was like, what's the point of it all? Was I deriving meaning and purpose from it? And I clearly wasn't. And I was fortunate in that around about the same time, my manager at the time was having similar sort of epiphanies. And it turned out that he was also quite interested in the tech space, and that we had complementary sort of skill sets. So at that point in time, it felt like a very obvious decision to pursue tech. But that was around about the time that the tech revolution really started to take on. And for me, it was just the most exciting time, because suddenly we were being introduced to these ideas where through technology, we were able to create new sort of innovative solutions to traditional problems that have always existed. But if we were able to execute and create these ideas in a way that works, the ability to then scale up those efforts is just astronomical, right? And the prospect of that, the fact that an idea that we had, starting off in a basement and then growing up beyond that, the fact that we had the ability to impact lives far well and beyond what we thought was possible, that was very much a luring factor for us. And when we started Giraffe, we looked around the continent and we said, well, we want to start by doing something that solves a local need. What's the biggest issue that we face here in South Africa? Well, it's unemployment. Well, how can we take technology to try and potentially address this issue? And we thought the best way to do this was to create a marketplace to solve any of the access issues that people, particularly job seekers in the lower to medium skilled demographic of the market, which is the majority of the workforce, mind you, they just don't have access and visibility to tons of opportunities that exist. And we thought, well, mobile penetration is increasing. Everyone has a cell phone in their hand. How can we use this as a tool to increase that access? And on the flip side, even though unemployment was so high, we started to see that businesses were really struggling to hire staff in this demographic in an efficient, cost-efficient, time-efficient manner. And through a SaaS platform, we created a marketplace that connected the two together in a much more efficient way. And yeah, that's that. I guess the rest is history, and that's how Giraffe was formed. We've since exited the business, and yeah, the last 6 months has been very much a point of introspection in my life and just trying to figure out what to next. There's just so many sort of lights to chase, and yeah, I'm still trying to figure out where to move on from here.
Oh, wow, thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's really exciting. As a young entrepreneur myself, I've really interacted with a lot of young people who have really been struggling to get into the job market. And I think, seeing what you're doing with Giraffe is really exciting, because you have that young demographic as a focus who are trying to get into the job market, and they don't have masters and PhDs. They're young people who are just trying to get a job to get ahead. So that's really quite exciting. Thank you so much for that presentation. Joselynn, moving on to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I was going through your profile earlier, and I was quite excited by just how much you have managed to accomplish in your journey. Would you please just share a bit about your journey, your entrepreneurial journey, and what motivated you?
Hi, Bruce. Thank you so very much for that lovely compliment. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate the opportunity to be here. As a young entrepreneur whose business is still, I wouldn't say in the teething stages, I'm starting to walk now. It's really amazing to see so many people come together from so many different industries and just share in this pot and crucible of knowledge. So, I just want to sincerely thank everyone at BYM for the opportunity. Look, on the surface level, my journey has transpired very quickly. But for me, I would say, just based on my position currently, it has been a lifetime in the making. And my story relates very closely to that of Ronak's. He explained earlier how he found himself in a very corporate environment where you have the bureaucracies of, politics and this and that. And for me, I experienced a bit of both worlds. I went to university. I did some exploring into what it is that I wanted to do as a legal professional. And of course, there are many options available. Predominantly, though, my experience in law school was that everybody wanted to go for the big law firms, the corporate world where you sort of are guaranteed a certain level of reward in terms of, salary, because the market is very saturated in the law industry. So that was the primary focus of most law graduates. I sort of just wanted to put my feelers out there and see, comparatively speaking, what would be best for me. So I worked at, some of the big law firms. I also did some vacation work at smaller law firms. I shadowed an advocate. There are different things to learn from each experience. And ultimately, I ended up working in a smaller law firm, which was very rich in, the amount of knowledge that I gained, the amount of experience and exposure that I had to clients. And that is really where my entrepreneurial spirit came from, is direct exposure to clients, speaking to people, learning about the marriage between being a professional and rendering a professional service, along with all of the traditional norms that come along with that. And also being an entrepreneur, learning how to run a business and just watching my superiors and sort of poking holes in what it is that they did and what it is that they didn't do. And one day I found myself in a situation where I started to ask myself questions about this traditional system that professionals simply employ. And I just thought to myself, if not, why not? Why not start your own business? Why not try to come up with solutions for the gaps in the professional market? And that's exactly what I did. I started my own law firm. So my entrepreneurial journey has been something that has been highly experimental. And that's sort of where my success comes from, collaborating with colleagues, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And if, it is impossible to find an existing rule or an existing solution, to just try and look at other industries and take advice from people who have done similar things. And that's how I've sort of built my brand. It's how I have structured the ethos in my law firm, and it's worked for me. So I'm very grateful. I am still learning, but it's really been an incredible journey for me.
Thank you so much. I like how you have really just started, how you've opened yourself up to exploring and just learning. And I think that's a very important aspect for anyone who is in business, just being open to a different line of thinking, to a different focus. I would like to know from you, how do we encourage innovation and entrepreneurship thinking in education from your standpoint, as someone who is also well accomplished, who can cite herself as an academia of sorts?
Look, I think that innovation means many things for different people, but to me, innovation required an experimental mindset. I think that in my experience, there were too many people who were defining innovation as something that should be internally focused on their own process to, protect their own margins and come up with their own solutions. But my view is that innovation should be aimed at clients and sort of creating solutions for them, which either saves them money or makes them money. For me, great ideas, like you said, it's very important to remain open to opportunities to learn and ideas from other people. So great ideas can come about, or they can come from just about everywhere. They can come from the outside in. So when you look at clients and their needs, and you look at your partner feedback, you can get inspiration for innovation from that angle. You can also get it from the top down. So it need not necessarily be within your organization that you look to, people who might have, climbed that ladder before you. So look at what they've done and try to create something different from that. It can also be sought from the inside out. So, your employees and their domain, their customer knowledge and their business knowledge. Because with me, I've worked at several different organizations, and so have other members of my team. They've worked in different industries, obviously within the legal, professional framework, but everybody comes with different ideas because of their different experiences. And it's important to, just in my own experience, look inward before you look outward, because you might be surprised at what you find. And with us as well, being a professional, you find yourself often getting stuck in the day-to-days of, just being a lawyer and doing what lawyers do. But it's also important to look at things that are not necessarily industry specific to try and see how you can catch up with with global trends. For instance, with technology, in my experience, the legal profession is very resistant to innovation in that respect. So it's been an interesting journey for me, just looking at other organizations and seeing where they derive their need or their their mechanisms for employing tech. And I sort of look at that and think to myself, how can I implement this into this traditional system that has been carved out for me and that is so strict and so resistant to change? So that's been incredibly interesting, and it's been much of a learning curve for me.
Thank you so much. Matt, you have a whole continental focus in terms of your business, and you've also just gone through different strides. And how have you positioned yourself to open up yourself for a more innovative and entrepreneurial thinking in your space and other spheres that you interact with?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I've gone on a journey. So after Spar's app, I developed another app called TapTuck, which helps parents pay for their kids' lunches at schools, so they don't have to take cash to schools. And then after that, I moved to London to see what skill sets I could derive here to further grow my entrepreneurial journey. And that's kind of shifted me rather rapidly into the crypto and blockchain space. And I've been an avid participant in the space since kind of early 2016, just trying and testing out these new solutions and conceptualizing how they can transform entire industries and economies. And that kind of led me to my current role as a venture capitalist with a company called Outlier Ventures, where we only invest in founders building in Web 3.0 technologies and decentralized finance and crypto and blockchain. And many of the founders that I deal with often have really relatable stories about growing up in Eastern Europe or rural Africa, and witnessing the challenges they faced by witnessing the challenges that their parents faced when trying to open a bank account, for example, because they either couldn't afford one because banking fees are a thing still, or they didn't have a physical representation of identification needed to open one because either their birth wasn't recorded or a document was lost, or they just don't have access to a bank branch because either the costs to travel to one or accessibility to one is just not feasible. And what I've started to see rather rapidly is the opening of ideation around democratized access to resources and finance. And you're seeing these beautiful digital solutions being built around identification tied to digital infrastructure like blockchain as a medium for securing that identity, so that no one ever needs a physical representation of identification or proof of bank account or proof of finance. And these decentralized entities really open and free everyone from the standpoint of wherever they are based, and whatever their social standing and whatever progress the government that they reside in or rely upon is in their innovation journey, it frees them from that. And there's no better example, and I hate using it as an example, but M-Pesa in Kenya, we saw. And M-Pesa, we all know that it's a service that was started in the UK. It wasn't brainstormed in Kenya, but the approach that they took was very poignant. And Joselynn touched on this. When we look at these solutions from the standpoint of the human, rather than the standpoint of furthering commercial interests, then we start seeing incredible innovation. And you're seeing that more and more in the decentralized community and Web3 community, where you're getting a combination of business-minded entrepreneurs who are like 16 years old coupling with software engineers and building, like rapidly building solutions in the space. And M-Pesa did just that. They looked at the human and the plight of the human in the context of Kenya and went, they don't have access to bank branches. No bank wants to build thousands upon thousands of bank branches and take the risk of crime and running out of money and not being able to provide services to the community, because that's a problem. And they built this really beautiful idea using the infrastructure that was available. And I'm seeing that more and more today in the decentralized community, but the scale at which these solutions are being built is incredible. And there is no friction in terms of where these ideas are starting. We've worked with entrepreneurs in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, in the most remote regions, and they have access to a mobile network, so they have access to Wi-Fi, and thus if you have access, or the internet, if you have access to the internet, you can do anything. And so that's been the very foundation of my approach to entrepreneurship, and I think it should be the foundation for any innovator or entrepreneur that is confronted by the plight of, oh, I need to go to a corporation to be successful or to upskill. You do not. You need a wife, you need an internet connection and a creative brain, and you can do absolutely anything. And the enablement of that is available.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Ronak, you have spoken at multiple top universities and across the continent, across the world. What has been your experience in relation to how we can, shape that thinking around entrepreneurship and innovation, particularly in those educational institutions? What has been your experience and what's your thought process?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I want to pick up on a point that Matt made. So I think the really exciting opportunity across Africa is that it's a continent where you can do well and you can do good simultaneously, and it doesn't have to be either or. So, I mean, if we back solve and if we just look at our demographics, which have been spoken about at length, youngest continent in the world, we're going to have the youngest working age population by 2050. This can either be a dividend or a disaster. The reality is that we need to back solve from politics of the stomach, right? Which is basically getting people jobs, getting them healthy, getting them educated so that they can contribute productively to the economy of the continent, right? So that's the starting point. And I think what we also see across Africa is that innovation is driven by necessity. And again, speaking to the point around, we've got the creativity, the innovation, the capacity, we just need the infrastructure. And I think in that regard, for me, infrastructure is the ultimate priority for the continent. And that's hard infrastructure, the roads, the rails, the telco towers, the soft infrastructure, the healthcare and the education. And then very importantly, the digital infrastructure, because if we don't have the skills and if we don't have the ability to be creative, then we're going to be left behind and we're going to become a laggard continent again. But with all of these enabling blocks put in place, then we can really, and I hate using this word, but I have to, we can leapfrog, right? So, and I think the infrastructure is fundamentally critical to the continent's progress, because what we are being asked to do is do things that have never been done before. We're being asked to democratize and industrialize simultaneously, but also to do this in the context of premature deindustrialization, where machines are coming and taking jobs, right? So we've got to solve this tension between this economy of the future and this economy of now, where we're talking about AI, machine learning, and robotics changing the game, but at the same time, we can't fix potholes, can't name streets, we can't keep the lights and the Wi-Fi on. So it's a big conundrum that policymakers, private sector, civil society, entrepreneurs all need to collectively solve. And I think that's the context within which we operate. I think importantly, there's maybe kind of three areas that are going to be really important is obviously we need to develop the right skills. So STEM skills, as we know, are really important. The policies are going to be critical. And here is where I think what gets really exciting is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because what this does is that this creates markets beyond our countries, right? And if you look at look at some of the trends that have emerged out of COVID: localization, digitization, and industrialization. They've all been supercharged by the pandemic, and they all fit quite neatly into what the Continental Free Trade Agreement is trying to achieve through integration. And then I think that the last thing, and I think maybe these are sectors which aren't very well known, but I think are really exciting, is in what I call the technicolor economy. So, this is a good opportunity to introspect and to look at what the future of our continent looks like. And I think the blue economy, the green economy, the purple economy, the gray economy, and the flat white economy are really interesting. And I'll just give brief descriptions around those before concluding. So the blue economy, pretty obvious: oceans, tourism, energy. We've got 38 coastal states in Africa with around 40,000 kilometers of shoreline. We're not doing nearly enough. It can be a great job creator. It can be a great revenue spinner, and we can also exploit the geopolitical competition between India and China and other superpowers if we play our cards right. Green, the green economy, pretty obvious. Again, agriculture and renewable energy. We could be the breadbasket of the world. 60% of Africa's employment is in the agricultural sector, and if we combine our labor with technology, I think that could be really interesting. The purple economy is something that's becoming really, really interesting. So if you look at the talents of Burna Boy, Trevor Noah, Jerusalem, all of kind of African art, culture, talent exploding on a global stage. I think instead of the world or Africa going to the world is now coming to Africa. And far from being a hobby, these are lucrative industries. So that really excites me. The flat white is the digital economy, which I'm sure has been spoken about at length. And then the gray is the informal sector. And this, I think, is really where fintech comes in, because bridging the gap between the informal sector and technology to bring people into the tax net, I think becomes really interesting. I know I've said a lot, so I'll leave it there for now.
No, thank you so much, Ronak, for citing all those different economies that we should be leapfrogging. As much as not too excited about using that phrase, but we should be leapfrogging to fast track innovation on the continent. Moving on, I would like to hear from you, Shafin, because you're someone who's interacting with a lot of young people in the recruitment space. What are some of the skills that you believe are needed by entrepreneurs in this 21st century?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that a cliche sort of answer is just going to be to stay hungry and just be curious. I think innovation is really born out of the fact that when an entrepreneur really deeply understands a problem and has this sort of skill set or a toolkit that they can use to potentially try and address the problem. And if we think about innovation that's happened throughout the history of humanity, and if you look at, I don't know, milestones like the invention of electricity becoming mainstream, and then you jump forward to saying the internet being invented, then smartphone penetration starting to become dominant. If you look at the last 20 years, when the internet has come into the equation, the amount of innovation we've seen is growing at an exponential sort of pace. And it's very difficult to sort of stay up to date with all the trends that are sort of happening. But if you zoom in on a focus, a discipline, an industry that is of an area that is interesting towards you, and you just sort of try your best to stay up to date with all of the lessons that are being learned by the thousands of startups that are trying different ways of solving problems, these are lessons that you don't have to learn yourself, right? These are good starting points for you. And when you have this toolkit, when it comes to a point where you need to begin innovating and thinking about a unique way of solving a problem, these are the lessons that you use as the foundation of your thinking, and hopefully in guiding you to create new ways to solving a problem. I think when we think about Africa, we have a lot of unique problems, problems that are unique to us as a continent, but the solutions for these might not necessarily be that unique. And the lessons already exist out there in the world. It's just a question of us identifying with what they are, repackaging them in a way that's relevant for our sort of circumstance, and then doing the hard work of nothing beats execution. You just need to be in the trenches and experiment, and as Ronak and Matt have said before, try, fail, iterate, and keep pushing forward to try and drive that innovation.
Thank you. Matt, what's your 2 cents?
Yeah, look, I completely agree with what Shafin just said, and I agree with what Ronak just said around infrastructure being a massive driver towards really uplifting and leapfrogging Africa into the global economy. I just find that narrative has just been existing for too long. When I was in BYM, like 9 years ago, that was still the narrative, and I don't think much has changed. I think actually it's gotten a little bit worse because we've become a little bit more reliant on this narrative that things are going to change and governments are going to start waking up to the responsibilities that they need to live by. I think we live in this world now that's, yes, there are areas in Africa that don't have the infrastructure needed to enable individuals and entrepreneurs, but I think we've got the very basics when it comes to internet accessibility increasing on a day-by-day basis, right? And Elon Musk's Starlink solution, which is still in beta phase, when that kind of releases and you've got this access to global internet at an infrastructural level of that kind of nature, then I think that would empower a lot of people, and the people that aren't accessible to traditional means of internet infrastructure. But I think what we're seeing today, and what I'm seeing in kind of more westernized markets, is that individuals are taking power into their own hands and developing a means of financial inclusion by just starting their own businesses in the most rudimentary ways as possible. And a great example of that is during COVID, there was this really beautiful movement taking place in the Philippines where a bunch of impoverished individuals that either had been fired or furloughed as a result of COVID started playing these play to earn games in the metaverse. And one great example is a game called Axie Infinity, and it's a game based on the blockchain. You collect these kind of Pokemon type digital creatures and you use them to fight other individuals, and you earn a cryptocurrency as a result. Now, the most insane thing that just boggles the minds of so many people is that the basic earnings that individuals were making from this game was $300 a month, which is double the minimum basic income of the Philippines. So just by playing a game, they were making double the minimum wage of that entire country. And some were even earning as much as $3,000 a month from just playing a game, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's a novel solution to any type of formalized economy, but what I'm saying is that can mean the difference between someone saying, everything's kind of the status quo and I'm just going to accept things for the way that they are and hope for change, versus I've now got a basic means of income that can empower me to do whatever I want and to chase my dreams and to build solutions that might take on the government for innovations in ports and enablement in these basic foundations of infrastructure, where I would never be able to even remotely entertain that idea because I don't have the financial ability to uplift myself out of the situation that I'm currently in. So I think a novel way to think of it is this beautiful, like, top-down approach to addressing the socioeconomic difficulties that we face in Africa, rather than relying on the status quo, which is more bottom-up.
Thank you so much. Joselynn, what are your thoughts? As someone who's obviously in the legal space, what do you have, any specific frameworks that you think we should be looking at to fast track innovation and entrepreneurship on the continent?
Apologies. I completely agree with what both Ronak as well as Matt have said about, the infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure is critical, but I do believe that, the machinery and the infrastructure on its own isn't enough to succeed, because we also need to know how to run that infrastructure. And I think that Africa is by no means an exception to this gap, or the potential gap in that regard. And, not only in the specialist technical skills that are required to work with the emerging technologies, but also in terms of the complementary capabilities to help people adapt to a job market that is changing all the time. I think that it is necessary for us to fast track our moves to skill and, to reskill the future and the existing workforce in our respective industries, to make sure that, the adjustments that are needed to be made are made early within the education ecosystem. And it goes back to the conversation that we were having earlier about the needs that we are currently facing in the fourth industrial revolution. The education system that we are implementing was built for a different time. And the problem is that we are looking backward to address problems which are meant to take us forward, which isn't very compatible. So I think that, the need for an innovation ecosystem also just requires the skills to run that system and to do all of this effectively. I think that today's fragmented efforts must be turned into a very cohesive approach in order for us to achieve this. So, institutions like the African Union and Africa 50, along with the Africa Growth Program and, the C4IR, have sown the seeds for, Pan-African collaboration and investment. But I think that more public and private partnerships are essential to this goal.
Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly rush to our chats because there's a number of comments there. One of the messages cited there speaks to mentorship. And someone said, listening to experiences and how you started is very inspirational. It's comforting to know that you're on the right track, on the right platform. I see partnerships and collaboration forming in this cohort. Opportunities for mentorship. Maybe does any of you have an appetite for mentorship? What's your experience like? Is it something that you're embracing?
I definitely think it is something that should be embraced by more people. But the problem, in my experience and in the experience of most of my peers, is that we come from an educational system that, is based on productivity lines and groups us according to our age and not necessarily any other factors. It doesn't necessarily encourage collaboration as much as, maybe post high school or early in university does. And I think that at grassroots levels, collaboration should be encouraged, because by our very human nature, that is how we learn, that is how we grow, that is how we learn to think about things very critically. And therefore, forming mentor and mentee partnerships, working in groups, learning to collaborate more, I think that is a very helpful and useful tool in helping us navigate and solidify our places in today's economy.
Okay. Shafin, what sort of as someone who's interacting with a lot of young people within the recruitment space, how important is mentorship? What provisions have you made in your personal capacity to facilitate that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite crucial. I think it comes down to the point of access. And, when we think about what the world was 20, 25, 30 years ago, it was a lot smaller of a place, or a lot bigger of a place. It was just harder to have conversations with relevant people. And the beauty of what the internet has done is it's made it's the great equalizer. A kid in a village in Rwanda accessing the internet through Starlink is suddenly having access to the same sort of content networks as a middle-class family member in the States. And so I definitely believe mentorship is something that we need to continue investing in. Me personally, when I think about all of the lessons that we've learned to get to a point where Giraffe was starting to grow, a lot of those came from speaking to other entrepreneurs in similar sort of spaces. And honestly, when we first started, I was quite shocked at how willing people are to have these sort of conversations. But I think it's a function of this new startup technology sort of culture we're beginning to foster. And quickly, people are realizing that through collaboration, that's the best way of applying multiple minds to a problem and really progressing society forward. And so, yeah, in the early days, when we started Giraffe, the first thing we did is we jumped onto LinkedIn. And we just literally found a whole bunch of other co-founders that were doing work similar to ours, just dropped them a message. And I would say more than 50% of them were willing to have a conversation with us. And for me, that was a turning point because obviously I derived massive value from that, but I was just surprised to even know that people were willing to have those sort of conversations. And I've made it a point, in my career going forward, wherever I'm able to assist other sort of entrepreneurs with experiences that I've had in my career, that's certainly something that I do. And in my personal capacity, I do mentor a few entrepreneurs along the journey wherever I can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Matt, what's been your experience? Have you been collaborating a lot, mentorship-wise? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've always been a firm believer that education doesn't really provide you anything more than a set of subject matter skills. Primarily, what it really does is teach you more of an EQ, an emotional quotient. So the ability to build strong relationships, be curious, and ask questions with those that might know something more than you, or together you can kind of combine your understanding of things and collaborate and come up with a unique solution. And I've always lived by that philosophy. So ever since my first job in the corporate world at IBM, I've relied solely on a set of mentors who I found were, managers, were executives of the business, and I'd reach out and explicitly request them to be a mentor of mine. And I want to learn about their journey, and I want to collaborate on the way that they think and how to grow exponentially in that regard, in a more collaborative manner. And that's the very, I see that as like a very foundation of the world that I live in, which is kind of the Web3 world, where a network is not effective without a community that believes in the idea that it solves, or the solution that it's working towards. You see, the Ethereum network, which is the second most highest, most valuable cryptocurrency and network out there, primarily driven by a network and a community of people that want to see it shaped in various ways and want to see it built in different ways, and they actively vote in that regard. So I think collaboration is essential for the future, and I've definitely been honored to have mentored a bunch of individuals that I've either helped invest in their business or grow in their business, and I would never turn anyone down if they ask me for advice or mentorship in any shape or form, because I think it's so essential. It's kind of the spirit of Ubuntu, right? We live in a continent where one of the quintessential notions is I am because we are, right? So that's the principle of mentorship. We can't walk alone. We've got to walk together, and thus we make progress together rather than on our own.
Thank you so much. We can't walk alone. We have to walk together. I really like that. Thank you so much for your contribution, guys. The guys who are attending this summit, please feel free to ask your questions. We're going to be taking your questions. But before I do that, I would like to quickly ask Ronak, please share with us, what do you think are some of the top innovation trends for the past, say, 20 years, from 2002 to, say, 2025? What do you sort of foresee as some of the innovation trends?
So I'll speak about this from a very high level macro perspective, because that's kind of what I do, is looking at the kind of policy interface. And I think, making this relevant to Africa, again, I'd highlight kind of three trends: digitization, industrialization, and localization. Those are the three big trends that we need to focus on, because ultimately that's where the world is going. I think, if you back solve a little bit and you go back in history, you'll see that also the zeitgeist of the time has changed quite significantly. So in 1989, 1990, what happened was the end of the Cold War, and you saw the Washington Consensus becoming the dominant theme. So you had globalization, capitalism, and democratization becoming the dominant story. And that persisted up until like 2008, where you had the financial crisis. You then had quantitative easing and fiscal austerity. The rise of social media created kind of right and left-wing politics, created fertile grounds for those to grow. And now it's kind of spun the other way, where instead of the Washington Consensus, we're now in an era of nationalism, an era of protectionism, and an era of rising authoritarianism. So I think we need to understand the context and how we operate. And the Beijing Consensus, rather than the Washington Consensus, is starting to be a more appealing agenda. So we need to kind of fit into the broader backdrop. And I think the lesson in that for Africa is that we need to bet on ourselves. Given our numbers, given the fact that the rest of the world is looking after themselves, we have nobody else apart from ourselves. So I think in terms of kind of broader context, that's, you know, where I think I'd probably suggest we look. And within that, I mean, the challenges are well documented: electricity, education, water, all of these kind of things. So I'm not going to kind of rehash that. I think what is, you know, quite interesting, and, you know, picking up on the mentorship point, I think some of the biggest lessons that I've learned around mentorship, I think I'd probably put into five buckets around what makes people successful when they go on an entrepreneurial journey. So I think work ethic obviously is non-negotiable. You need to be really passionate and work hard. But I think, you know, in terms of the skills, empathy, curiosity, and the ability to connect the dots, I think is something that I've realized is fundamentally important. And again, that speaks to relationships. I think completely underrated point is the importance of good manners, because good manners will open up doors for you that the best education won't. And I think people often tend to forget that. The other thing is thinking time. So I think, you know, when in this kind of pressurized world where we're constantly on the go and needing to do things and needing to be hyper productive all the time, what I'm realizing more and more is setting aside the time and being a lot more selective around time is really important, because that's when you can really be creative. And I think the last thing, and especially for the folks in this BYM cohort, is that the mentality shift from being successful to being significant is a really important one. In Africa, we need leaders who have impact beyond themselves and leaders who are significant rather than success. And what you prioritize when you make that differentiation, I think is really important. And I'll pause there.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronak. Someone actually asked, whilst you spoke about, you know, leadership and so forth, someone is asking, you mentioned that we need to democratize and industrialize simultaneously, but such a system is prone to challenges. Do you have any foreseeable challenges and recommendation solutions thereof? In a minute, I know it's very short, but how would you respond to that? Yeah,
so I mean, look, across Africa, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, right? And I think you've got some countries which are hardly democracies, like Rwanda, that are delivering. And, you know, if you look at comparatively at East Asia in the past, Singapore, Taiwan, places like that, hardly model democracies, but were able to deliver. I think regardless of whether a country wants democracy or a more authoritarian regime, what's really important is the quality of leadership. And I think that's fundamentally what we're lacking in Africa at the moment. We've got analog leadership for a digital age. And I think that is fundamentally the problem. So regardless of the system, like China's not a democracy, but they deliver. And I think, you know, moving from rhetoric to reality and execution is, I think, the fundamental challenge, because otherwise we've got a ticking time bomb on our hands.
Thank you so much for that response. Touching on legal, there's a question for you, Joselynn. Someone said, there's a need for startups and businesses wanting to scale up, requiring different legal needs to ensure their interests are protected. Some small initially, some are length as time goes on. What exists to ensure they can access services that need to safeguard their IP as they innovate, without solely looking into large firms where rates may be significantly higher than they can afford in the early stages, and therefore forego having necessary legal opinion. Joselynn?
Thank you for that question. I think that it's a very important question, and it also touches upon, you know, what I was saying earlier about the traditional approaches that people have to legal services, both from the client perspective as well as from an institutional perspective insofar as law firms are concerned. Many people are wary of, you know, especially SMEs, you know, of approaching a lawyer for legal assistance because they're afraid of, you know, the daunting idea of, you know, spending most of their hard-earned capital on costs. And I think the problem that we have identified is that traditionally law firms place all of the transactional risk on clients, and that creates a lot of consumer hesitancy. In order to sort of remove some of the transactional risk from the client and place it more on the law firm in the form of more transparency, and not simply leaving things up in the air and telling the client, okay, you know, you could or you couldn't, or, you know, it may be a success, it may not be a success, or simply failing to align a client's expectations or curiosity with the realities of an actual outcome, which most law firms regrettably don't do. The solution to that issue and to sort of the unpredictability from the consumer's perspective is to place more emphasis on a value-based output. In other words, you know, with my organization, if we get approached by a client, we have 3 different areas of speciality, and that is commercial law, criminal law, and family law. Now, of course, these are all very different areas of law, but I'll use commercial law as an example, whereby you have an SME that perhaps needs contractual work to be done. What we would do in that instance is we would tailor make our solution to the needs of the business and make it as simplified as possible. We'll be as transparent as we can from a cost perspective, and we'd manage the client's expectations by providing what we call a fee estimate. And that way, you know, you can actually, as a client, you can make an informed decision with regards to mitigating your own risk, and also just make provision for being compliant with that process.
Thank you so much for that response. You know, it's quite a challenge at this stage with the massive appetite there is for blockchain and cryptocurrency in the country. There's still a lot of hesitation around the legalities of, you know, blockchain and cryptocurrency locally, and sort of how the government interacts with that space. What's your 2 cents on that, Matt?
Yeah, and hesitancy and skepticism towards these industries is correct. You know, with the disasters of billions being lost in the instances of AfriCrypt and a bunch of fraudulent schemes promoting massive returns, I think the approach of skepticism is correct. I think the blanket the blanket ideation around cryptocurrency being fraudulent and being kind of a mechanism for criminals is incorrect, and it's a narrative that I have to challenge every day, because yes, you know, the fact of the matter is that regulation hasn't been as prominent in its ability to keep up with the rate of change in technology, especially in the blockchain and crypto space. And that's a problem of regulators. It's not a problem of innovators. What cryptocurrency and blockchain has done has really enabled individuals to move and create solutions way more rapidly than traditional technological solutions could. And regulation just hasn't been able to keep up. So that's one thing that I think regulators really need to do a lot of thinking about, how they can collaboratively work with institutions and entities and influencers in the space that are building solutions on using this technology. But I definitely think that it is the enablement technology of the future. One thing that we are, and myself personally, are dedicating a lot of time on is non-fungible tokens. And for everyone watching, if no one knows what a non-fungible token is, effectively what it is a contract that allows for a digital good to be unique or rare, much like a physical item is like an artwork, right? So the traditional way of digital goods was that if I had a song by Drake that just came out and a friend wanted, I could copy and paste it, or I could send it over the internet. And it was very easy to do so. And there weren't really these walled gardens that prevented that. You could just create another website or another IP address or another mechanism to share these digital goods that a lot of IP owners get very upset about because they're being replicated and the IP is being lost. Non-fungible tokens are these digital native goods that are tied to the blockchain. So they have an encrypted kind of code that secures them to the blockchain, and any replication of them is defaulted because it won't meet that identifier. And so you're seeing this beautiful kind of engagement of creators in the space that have often been subject to corporate interests and brokers that have been the gatekeepers to the monetization of their creativity. So for example, if I'm a musician and I come up with a song, I have to go through a label, or I have to go through a music broker or a production manager to sell and market that music, right? And they take the lion's share of the fees or the revenue as a result. Well, what blockchain and NFTs does is secure that asset to me, and every time someone plays that music, or every time someone consumes that good, I get immediate earnings from that use, right? So I physically own and can control the consumption of a digital good. And what that's doing is empowering artists, musicians, and creators in the digital space, which was never an option to a lot of these people because they were subject to the walled gardens of commercialization, and those were controlled by brokers and dealers and the rest of it. So I get very excited about the NFT world and what it can seek to promote creators in especially the African context. Artists and musicians are very prominent in Africa, and they've been absolutely exploited. And I think now you've got a medium that they can earn the lion's share of what they deserve. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think particularly if you look at that arts industry, there is a lot of milestones and strides around making their content, giving them more ownership of their content and allowing them to push their music without large corporates behind them, which was before very difficult. You needed to have a record label to push you before you can actually, but now we have a lot of independent artists who are not even signed to any label and who are doing very well. But I mean, I can imagine that there's a lot of challenges that a lot of people initially face when setting up their own institutions or structures. And there's a question that has been posed for Shafin. What would you say are the key steps in exploring your own venture? Do you recommend running that part-time whilst employed, or going full-time and hands-on? Shafin, what's your 2 cents there?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm not too much of a fan of trying to get a venture off the ground part-time. Just because I think that there's no substitute to being in the trenches, and it's all well and good to stay in the boardroom and plan as much as you want, have these Excel models, doing these market sizings, whatever it is. But the moment you hit the ground running, there's this whole myriad of factors that you wouldn't have even considered that the market sort of just presents itself with. And unless you're like sort of completely consumed within the space, it's only then that you're really able to understand all these various nuances and particularly come up with solutions for it. So from a part-time perspective, I'm not generally a fan of it. However, you don't just jump into a venture, and I think there's a lot of due diligence that's required, both in the context of the startup that you're trying to set up, as well as you as an individual. Are you ready to venture down that path, right? So from a financial perspective, it's likely that things are going to be rough for the next 12, 18, 24 months. Are you prepared for that? And what's your backup plan as a result of that? Do you have the support structure in place? Entrepreneurship is a very lonely journey, man. And, these are all sort of things that you need to think about beforehand. And then there's the startup as an idea, right? Do you have all the things in place to think that this is a startup that will succeed? Have you done enough research in that regard? And that talks to, I guess, more about the market size and the commercial model that you're trying to implement, understanding other sort of players in the space that are operating, are they doing well, understanding investment that's going into the space, is it a growing sort of industry? And then finally, something that I'm a huge proponent of is a co-founder. There are lots of successful entrepreneurs that are sole entrepreneurs, and not taking anything away from them, but especially when you're trying to do something quite innovative in your field and there isn't quite anything like it, you're going to be faced with a lot of problems that not very many people in the world can relate to. And in that sense, having a co-founder at your side that understands the pain that you both are going through, at least for me, is a little bit of consolation to just keep pushing and going through. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So personally, did you quit your job to venture into business, or you did it part-time initially?
I mean, so I was in consulting, so we were very consulting about it, and we spent 6 months like building the models. And but by the way, when the day we started, we thought, oh, cool, here's revenue in 12 months. We're going to see this exponential growth. We were very wide-eyed and naive, I guess. There was a lot of due diligence that was done up until a point, and where we felt we had an execution plan, let's say for the next 12 to 18 months. And yeah, we just ended up resigning thereafter. And we started the company, except, what you plan versus how things sort of manifest in real life are quite different. And we learned those lessons as we went through with the journey.
Thank you so much. Ronak, what's your 2 cents? What would you recommend? Would you recommend that one does it part-time initially, or should they drop everything and focus entirely on that? I mean, the conversation is different when you're a parent, because, or when you have a lot of responsibilities, you have a lot to worry about. But what's your 2 cents?
Yeah, so I think you can conceptualize maybe part-time, ideate, take some time to chip away and refine the vision. But when it comes to execution, you can't do it effectively part-time, right? And I think entrepreneurship has to be about passion, because otherwise you're not going to succeed. I think the one thing I'd add to what Shafin has said is that, what was quite liberating for me is understanding that success is not permanent and failure is not fatal, because you can recover from mistakes. They're actually all part of the process. And I think the more mistakes, the quicker you fail, and the quicker you learn the lessons and then pick yourself up, is I think what makes a good entrepreneur. So nothing more to add.
Thank you so much. Joselynn, what do you think? Or what do you recommend?
I completely agree with Ronak in that, just based on my own experience, I had to either choose one or the other, not because I felt like I was incapable of, having a side hustle, as most people would call it, but simply because I believed that there would have been limitations to this baby that I was trying to grow had I, tried to sort of multitask the whole thing. So I definitely think that it should be an all or nothing. And when you're an entrepreneur and you're working on something, I think that dedication should be holistic, and it should be a total commitment that one makes. And that's produced results for me in terms of my own business. It's a full-time commitment, and I think that is just one of the ways in which I've experienced it to be rewarding.
Yeah, thank you so much. Matt, on the other hand, you have juggled a number of startups at the same time. So surely you might not have a huge challenge with juggling a job and the side hustle. What's your position?
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. I've been a victim of both sides. So I've committed entirely to startups, and great examples of that was SparsUp and TapTuck. But then I've also been a major proponent of the side hustle. At the moment, I work for Outlier. I've got an advisory business that I started myself, which I do on the side. I run a fintech podcast and newsletter, and I invest in a bunch of companies and advise a bunch of companies on the other side. So, I think if you're building something completely novel, I completely agree with the other panelists that you need commitment. And from myself in the operations of a VC, we look for that. We want to see committed entrepreneurs that have thrown everything at their idea and what they're trying to solve. That's a massive proponent to being a part of our cohort, of our accelerators, and receiving investment from us. It's one of the factors in our due diligence process. But then, if there's something that always has intrigued you and you want to explore and see whether there's opportunity there, and Shafin touched on this, which is if you want to be a consultant about starting a business, then I definitely promote that. I think there's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on when you pull the lever to commit to a fully commercial model. Either you need to dive in entirely into that, or make sure that you've got a supportive team and co-founder backing you up to support the efforts and the capacity constraints that you might face if you're doing it on a side hustle basis. So I think you can dabble in both, but I definitely think that if you're looking for support from the entities that safeguard entrepreneurs, like incubators and accelerators and venture capitalists, they definitely look for the fact that you are solely committed to this thing and you're willing to do whatever it takes to commit to the entrepreneurship journey, because it's a hairy one. It's terrifying.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. We left with almost a minute, but there's someone who has asked a question about what do you think the impact of policies such as universal basic income on innovation and entrepreneurship. So I don't know, Matt, are you able to quickly respond to that? So they're saying, understandably, we are realistically a long way off from the possibility. If you had to imagine it forward, what do you think the impact of policies such as universal basic income be on innovation and entrepreneurship? In 30 seconds.
Yeah, I've touched on this. I've touched on this before. I think financial enablement through democratized technology is definitely something that encourages people to explore the things that they're passionate about. So, I've always been an advocate for universal basic income to uplift individuals out of the notion that they should commit to corporate entities straight out of university, or commit to the status quo because they don't get access to the resources necessary to bring them into this entrepreneurship journey. So if a universal basic income is a mechanism to drive that creativity or that passion to create innovation, to start the entrepreneurship journey, then I'm a full advocate for that. It's just about what impact that universal basic income has on the governments and the jurisdictions that are granting that. And I think that's where it becomes a very big debate on what things are you giving up as a country to provide that universal basic income.
Thank you so much, Matt. Guys, we're out of time, but I would like to once again thank my panelists for this robust conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you guys about innovation and entrepreneurship in Africa. Thank you so much for taking the time to partake in this discussion.